Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to times that people regretted celebrating too early. Now, you see it a lot in everyday life, especially in sports, where people celebrate ahead of time. I remember in the 2022 World Cup, Kylian Mbappe thought he'd scored a goal, ran off celebrating, nobody ran with him because he'd missed by miles. So it happens, and it happens quite regularly, I'd say. So I thought we could take a look at some examples of when it happens and see how stupid these people make themselves look, really. So if you're new to the channel, you know what to do. Let's get into the video.
Being focused is one of the most important things in life. Under no circumstances should you ever lose your concentration, especially if you've got hundreds, if not thousands of eyeballs watching you live all at once. Unfortunately, when victory is closer than ever, not everyone acts accordingly. Today, I'm going to show you the stories of people who started to celebrate too early and lost at the last second. Ready to see them? Let's get it on! In a high-stakes sport like MotoGP, where you're probably at least a little bit excited to still be alive when you cross the finish line, it's not surprising people want to start celebrating early. But a lap early might be a bit much. This racer thought he'd won when he slowed down and started happily enjoying his victory, but his opponents knew it wasn't over. He seems almost confused as to why they're all flying past him at breakneck speeds, but you can't win a race without being competitive. So instead of accepting his opponents are right, he just celebrates harder to prove he'd won. When he finally had to accept his fate and put his head in his hands, presumably to hide his face in shame, it was way too late to get back to anywhere near the lead. He ended up finishing in only 14th place. Sometimes it's worth listening to your competitors. Running requires many impressive...
He had one lap to go, he was in the lead, and he finished 14th. He dropped all them places in one lap because he thought he'd won. I don't think I could ever ride a bike again. I wouldn't be able to be in the sport again if I went from 1st to 14th in one lap for celebrating early like that. That's insane that he didn't know which lap he was on.
skills, but you probably wouldn't imagine that counting was one of them. This former world champion learned that the hard way though. This 5,000-meter race saw him make incredible time and pull out way into the lead, almost certainly to take the gold, except that it was one lap too early. He had miscounted and thought he was on his final lap when he crossed the finish line and pumped his fist. He made the huge mistake of jogging off the track to celebrate before he saw his closest competitor sprint past him at an impressive speed. Of course, he quickly returned to the race, but he'd realized his mistake way too late, and of course he'd burnt all his energy sprinting amazingly fast for the win in the last lap. That little mistake in celebration didn't only cost him the lead, but almost the whole scoreboard, and he finished in only 10th place. I wouldn't be surprised to see him doing an extra lap just in case in the future. It only makes sense that champions want to celebrate when they're on a high, but this Moto X competitor may have taken that just a little bit too literally. She had an amazing race and was way out in the lead, so she took a moment to pump her fist in celebration of her soon-to-be win while at the peak of an impressive jump. Unfortunately, she's made a tiny mistake, which she could have corrected if only she hadn't taken her hand off the throttle. She didn't have the time to correct the mistake before her bike landed nose down and crashed, giving her almost thoroughly beaten opponents to take the lead. Just remember, your opponents are even more inclined to want to beat you if you take a moment to rub their noses in your lead. So always save your celebrations for after you've crossed the finish line if you want to avoid tears.
That's instant karma. That is what that is. That is absolutely instant karma. Like, I get wanting to celebrate, and if you feel like you're that far in front that you're gonna win, always just take a look over your shoulder for one, in regards to the runner. But that one, it's just, you're in midair on a motorbike. Why would you take your hand off the throttle? You're asking for trouble.
That escalated quickly.
It's never good to be a sore loser. Even if you make a mistake, accept it with grace and move on, and never ever throw a tantrum or you could end up like this guy. Sure, it's understandable that he would be frustrated with just missing like that, but flinging his golf club around in anger wasn't a good idea. That's a pretty humiliating outcome for a really small mistake, especially for a champion golfer. I guess at least he had
It's real life Happy Gilmore.
something to really lose his temper about after that minor disaster. We all know the cold touch of defeat, and if you're a Braves fan, you'll be more familiar with the Freeze. He's the sprinter in the superhero costume who likes to race fans in between innings at their games. He's impressively tough to beat, and often leaves even pretty good runners trailing behind him, despite them having a really large head start on him. The worst thing you can do is believe you've won before actually crossing the finish line, because just when you least expect it, he could overtake you. That's not even the first time this has happened, because of course that's not the first time a fan made the horrible mistake of celebrating just a little too early. You know you were just a little too confident if your opponent overtaking you makes you fall over in shock. These defeats really do give a whole new meaning to the phrase, leave them in the dust. It's important to keep your eyes open even when you're just walking around, so it's especially important when you're in the middle of a cycling race. And please, make sure that the line you just cycled over was actually the finish line before you start celebrating. That's the mistake this poor cyclist made. Yes, she crossed a line painted on the road, but it wasn't the big one. Before she realized, though, she stopped pedaling and threw her arms in the air in joyous celebration, and her opponent took the opportunity to overtake her and snatch the victory she thought she already.
That one guy in the white is pointing. For sure, that again. The one guy in the white is pointing to say, "No, the line's over here." Let's just go back just a little bit. A little bit more. Watch the guy in the white in the crowd here.
Before she realized, though, she stopped pedaling and threw her arms in the air in joyous celebration, and her opponent took the
line's over
opportunity
here
to overtake her and snatch the victory she thought she already.
He's like, the line, it's over here, it's over there. You've not won, it's over there.
He had from her grasp. If it were me, I'm not sure losing the race would have been the worst part of that, though. It must have been seriously embarrassing making such a big mistake in front of all those people. Even the kid looks disapproving. We're usually advocates for the sentiment go big or go home. That's probably not true if what you're going big on is a premature celebration. This World Series poker player knows that now. He went all out in celebration of a $1 million win and made sure to seriously rub his win in his opponent's face, shouting, prancing around, ripping off his cardigan and throwing it on the floor, which to start with is an odd choice of clothing if that's what you're going to be doing. But that wasn't the big problem with his huge private party. The real mistake was that he chose to celebrate before the final card was dealt. But to be fair, there was only one card that could lead to a win for his opponent. Never forget karma is swift. And if you're going to celebrate like a rude child for a full minute before knowing the outcome, you're going to regret it. Sometimes you catch yourself.
If the game isn't over, don't celebrate. That looked like a professional setup to me, and he needed. There was still one more card to be played. He would know that. So how is he celebrating like that when? I mean, if you're gonna play the game, you need to know the rules. And if you don't know that there's still another card to be played, how are you gonna celebrate like that?
Doing something really amazing. When that happens, it can be difficult to not immediately start jumping for joy, but it might be in your best interest to hold off for a moment. This budding tennis star found himself battling through a really tough rally to win a point. He was playing expertly, possibly even surprising himself, especially when he managed to return the ball at a particularly difficult moment. He thought he'd won it, but his opponent felt otherwise. Sure, it was a difficult shot for his opponent to get, but he did it anyway, and all while the young player's back was turned in celebration of his amazing not winning point. At least now he knows you can't let your guard down even for a moment. He probably won't be making that mistake again in a hurry. Being a great sportsman doesn't only take physical prowess, but a specific dedicated mental state as well. That's definitely what was needed in this heart-pounding cyclocross race, where we see the man who should have been the winner accidentally think he'd crossed the finish line when he still had a whole lap to go. Not only did he make that mistake, but it took him ages to realize that everyone else was still racing. When he finally recognized his mistake, he'd been overtaken by many of his most dangerous competitors. On the bright side, he really gave the audience a show to remember, as he slowly but surely pulled back out to the front against some fierce opponents. It was neck and neck, but he'd exhausted himself by sprinting too early and trying to catch up, so he just missed out in the very last moments. At least it was a race for the history books, even though he's probably too disappointed to.
Heartbreaking. He dropped them places because he celebrated too early, and then he worked his way all the way back to the front just to lose right at the line. Heartbreaking. I can't imagine the feeling he must have had when that happened. That would be devastating. That would be absolutely devastating. I can't believe that he made it all the way back to the front just to lose it at the end after he made that blunder.
Care. Rule number 1 when doing just about anything is never underestimate your opponents. We think that's what went wrong in this clip, at least. Either that or this skater doesn't know there's any such thing as a finish line. He starts celebrating what he probably presumed was a surefire win, way before the finish line. Obviously, his lead wasn't anywhere near as big as he must have thought it was. If you start skating on one leg with your arms in the air when you're meant to be sprinting, it's like a flashing light to anyone who wants to beat you. His nearest competitor saw the huge gap he'd left and overtook him just before the finish line. He was so sure he'd won, he didn't even notice he'd been beaten until he realized the crowd wasn't cheering with him. It can't be a good feeling when you realize you're celebrating something all on your own, and it really can't be good when you learn it's because you didn't actually.
That is the Kylian Mbappe situation right there, celebrating on your own. The one that I referred to in the intro. If you've got someone over your shoulder, you've got to know they're still a threat. You've got to know. You've got to have a look over your shoulder before you start that celebration.
Win. Boxing is one of those sports that can get a little difficult to follow. Sure, there are times when you can see exactly who's won, but other times it's all in the points, and even the boxers themselves get confused. This match was one of those. It got really, really close, and in the end, Logan Paul decided to celebrate a victory by pumping his fist in the air. Except the victory wasn't his. KSI was soon announced the victor, which really must have hurt since this was already a rematch. Logan will now insist forever that he'd lost due to a penalty points deduction he wasn't aware of, but still, everyone can see he jumped the gun on this one.
Okay, so that's it for the times that people regretted celebrating too early. It's just in those race situations, you've got to look over your shoulder. You just have to. I mean, why would you assume that you've won if you haven't previously looked over your shoulder? Just because you're out in front, it doesn't mean that someone isn't behind you. So I don't understand why you wouldn't first check over your shoulder to see if there's anyone there before you celebrate. But it's a harsh lesson, but one that needs to be taught, because you can't celebrate until you're over that line, until you've won whatever it is you're in. Or even if it's in football and you score a goal, like I said about Kylian Mbappe, he ran off celebrating a goal when the ball was miles over the bar. You just need to make sure that what you're aiming to achieve is done before you hit that celebration. Otherwise, you look like a fool. And deservedly so, because that's it's pure arrogance at the end of the day. If you're that arrogant that you think you're untouchable, then you deserve stuff like this to happen to you. But that was quite interesting. It's some funny ones in there, so it was enjoyable. If you did enjoy the video also, you know what to do, and if you're new to the channel, you also know what to do, and I'll see you next time.